I had never been a person of faith. God, heaven, hell, those were abstract concepts, ideas I had heard about but never truly pondered. Maybe there was something beyond this life. Maybe there wasn't. Either way, I never wasted time thinking about it. My days were filled with school, social media, and hanging out with friends. I lived for the present, never worrying about what lay ahead, until everything changed. That evening, September 17, 2021, was supposed to be like any other. I was walking down the street with my best friend, both of us laughing over something trivial when it all happened too fast. The blaring sound of a horn, the sharp cries of bystanders, and then the impact. I felt my body lurch backward as if I were nothing more than a weightless doll. And then, nothing. No pain. No fear. Just a deafening silence. I opened my eyes, or at least I thought I did, and what I saw sent a chill through me. My own body lay crumpled on the pavement, unmoving. My best friend was beside me, calling my name in a desperate voice, while others rushed around in frantic motion. But I wasn't there anymore. I was above them, floating, observing everything from a place I shouldn't have been. It was then that the horrifying truth hit me. I was dead. A wave of panic surged through me. I tried to shout, to move, to reach my body, but I had no voice, no limbs, only an overwhelming sense of helplessness. Then, without warning, something unseen gripped me, pulling me backward with an unnatural force. I expected light. I expected peace. But there was no warmth, no golden glow guiding me forward. Instead, an all-consuming darkness swallowed me whole. This wasn't just the absence of light. It was something alive, something suffocating, pressing against me like a tangible force. The silence shattered, replaced by eerie whispers, overlapping voices speaking in tongues I couldn't understand. Some laughed, others wept, and still others called my name, stretching it into something unrecognizable, something mocking. A deep, bone-chilling cold seeped into me, not the kind that made skin prickle, but something that burrowed into my very essence. That was when I knew. This wasn't heaven. I was being dragged somewhere else. And with every passing second, my terror grew. I fought against it, struggling to hold onto something. Anything, but there was nothing to grasp, nothing solid in the consuming void. The whispers intensified, their tones shifting from sinister amusement to ravenous anticipation. Something was waiting for me in that darkness, something unseen but terrifyingly real. And I understood, with a certainty that shattered me, that I belonged here. Then, just as the fear became unbearable, a voice rang out, deep, commanding, cutting through the void like thunder. Stop. At once, the darkness recoiled, as if seared by an unseen force. A brilliant light erupted, slicing through the blackness like a flaming sword. Its heat was unbearable, not like fire, but like exposure, as though it was peeling away everything I had hidden, everything I had been. Every lie, every selfish act, every moment I had ignored a voice within myself, it was all laid bare. And then, amid that piercing radiance, I saw him. I didn't need an introduction. I knew who he was the instant our eyes met. Jesus stood before me, not with anger, not with fury, but with something infinitely more unbearable: truth. His gaze wasn't one of condemnation, yet it held no comfort. It was a mirror, reflecting not just who I had been, but who I could have been. And in that moment, something I had never considered before struck me with absolute clarity. My life had never been a string of random events. It had been a series of choices. And I had chosen wrong. I wanted to speak, to plead, to ask for another chance. But I couldn't. Before him, there were no justifications, no defenses, no second chances. Only the raw, undeniable truth of everything I had been. If you are not subscribed, I recommend subscribing and activating the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. And then, without him needing to say a word, the visions began. They started slowly, like the opening frames of a movie, one that I had no choice but to watch. My entire life, every choice, every mistake, every moment of pride and arrogance, unfolded before me. But this wasn't just a simple reflection. No, the pain of every scene, every second, was seared into my soul. It wasn't just a passive experience. It felt real, like I was living through each of those moments all over again. I saw myself, mocking the very people who placed their trust in a higher power, scoffing at their beliefs, making fun of their unwavering faith. I saw the faces of those who had truly believed, their eyes filled with sincerity, and I remember how I brushed them off, dismissing them like they were foolish. I was callous in my disregard for what they held dear. But even worse, I saw the countless times when I turned my back on the suffering of others. I saw the people who needed help, those who were crying out for kindness, for empathy. And yet, I chose to ignore them, to pretend that their pain wasn't mine to carry. The excuses I told myself echoed in my ears. It's not my problem. I don't have time for this. I've got enough to worry about. I watched as I walked away from people in need, as if their struggles were nothing more than an inconvenience to me. I saw how I had become numb to the world around me, unwilling to be moved by the suffering of others. And then, in the silence that followed, I saw something that shattered me to my core. The moments in my life where I could have changed, where I could have been a better person, where I could have helped, and I didn't. Every opportunity to do good, to make a difference, was laid out in front of me like a road that I could have walked down, but I turned away blindly. I was too focused on my own life, my ambitions, my comfort. I had wasted it all. It wasn't that I hadn't felt that emptiness, that gnawing hunger for something more. I had felt it countless times, deep in my chest. It was a restlessness I couldn't explain, a yearning for something that was always just out of reach. But each time, I pushed it aside. I filled the void with distractions. Work, parties, self-centered pursuits, and the never-ending chase after success and validation. I convinced myself that if I just kept moving forward, if I just kept living life on my terms, I would fill that space. But deep down, I knew it wasn't enough. I knew I was avoiding something I couldn't face. And now, standing in front of him, I saw the cost of my choices. The weight of my decisions pressed down on me with such force that I felt as though I were suffocating. It was like looking at a picture of myself, but seeing someone I no longer recognized, someone I had betrayed. The vision shifted, and the past faded into the background. No longer was I reliving my mistakes. Now, I was looking at something far worse, a future that hadn't yet come to pass but felt inevitable. The world before me was twisted beyond recognition. The sky, once blue and open, was now consumed by a thick, inky blackness. It wasn't just darkness, it was oppressive, suffocating as if the very air itself had been poisoned. The streets were engulfed in flames, wild and out of control, but it wasn't the kind of fire you could fight with water or fire trucks. No, this fire wasn't meant to burn things. It was meant to consume, to tear everything apart, leaving only ashes in its wake. I could see people running, terrified, their faces etched with horror. They were screaming, shouting for help, running for their lives. But there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. I couldn't see exactly what was chasing them, but I felt it, a presence, a force that hovered in the air, invisible but unmistakable. The terror was palpable, thick like smoke. The air was so heavy with fear that it felt like it could suffocate you just by breathing it in. And then, I saw them, shadowy figures, moving through the chaos like phantoms. But what disturbed me more than anything else was the way the people reacted to them. They weren't running away from these figures, as anyone in their right mind should have. No, they were following them. They were walking toward them, hypnotized, as if they were being led by some unseen hand, willingly walking straight into their destruction. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't see the cliff they were about to walk off of. And I, helpless, could do nothing but watch. Then his voice came again, calm but filled with an undeniable authority. This is what is to come. It was a declaration, a finality, a verdict. And in that moment, I knew. I knew that this wasn't just a vision. It wasn't some distant possibility. It was a warning. It was a glimpse into a future that was waiting for me, for all of us, if we continued down the path we were on. And as the weight of that realization settled over me, everything changed again. I suddenly felt myself being pulled downward as if gravity itself had decided to abandon me. It was as though I were falling into an endless abyss. There was no wind, no sensation of the earth beneath me, just the feeling of being pulled deeper, further into something I couldn't escape. The heat was unbearable, intense and overwhelming. It was like I was being cooked alive, the air thick and suffocating, like I was trapped in a furnace with no way out. And then, I smelled it. The smell was so vile, so revolting, that it nearly made me gag. It was the stench of decay, of rotting flesh, but it was more than that. It was the smell of something that didn't belong, something dark, something that should never have existed. It was the smell of death, of hell itself. My body went numb with terror. I couldn't see anything yet, but I could feel it, the dread, the heaviness in the air. It was suffocating, like the very ground itself was made of fear. And then, I hit the ground. It wasn't a gentle landing, not even close. The earth beneath me was rough, searing hot, like the surface of an inferno. My skin burned as I touched the ground, and I could hear the crackling of flames in the distance, growing louder and closer. But these flames weren't like any fire I had known. No, these flames didn't consume, they tortured. They didn't burn away, they inflicted pain. The sounds around me were unbearable. Screams, wails of agony, cries of regret. People, real, living people, were writhing, twisting in the flames, their faces contorted in pain. It wasn't just physical agony. It was emotional and spiritual. I could feel their remorse, their sorrow, the weight of everything they had done wrong, everything they had ignored. It was a pain so deep, so suffocating, that it felt as though it could tear you apart from the inside out. And then I saw them, the faces. People I knew. People from my past. Friends. Classmates. Acquaintances. Even strangers who had crossed my path once and whom I had long since forgotten. But they weren't the same as I remembered. They were twisted, contorted by the agony they were in. And they were crying out to me. Their voices filled the air, reaching for me, desperate. But it wasn't just for help. No, they were calling my name, as if I could do something for them now. And I realized, in that moment, that I couldn't. I was just as trapped as they were. I couldn't save them. But what shattered me was the face of my old friend. He was there too, his eyes filled with something I had never seen before. It wasn't the friendship I had known, it was pure, raw despair. His gaze met mine, and in that instant, I saw the truth. He had accepted it. He had accepted that he would never escape this place. He would never leave. And neither would I. It was too late. For all of us. The truth in his words hit me like a sharp blow, reverberating deep within me. I had seen the people, the ones who had desperately cried out, trying to reach the gates, to be saved, but something was holding them back. Their voices, pleading, desperate, echoed in the air, but no matter how hard they tried, the gates remained closed to them. I felt the weight of their rejection. I felt their anguish as they realized that even though they called his name, they had never truly embraced him. They had known of him, but they had never known him. I felt the crushing guilt settle in my chest as the realization dawned on me. I had been one of them. I had known about him, heard his name spoken, and even respected him in some distant corner of my mind. But I had never truly given him my heart, never truly surrendered my life to him. I had lived with the illusion that there was always more time, that I could put off making a decision, that I could keep living as I had been, without changing, without truly seeking him. As I stood there, trembling in the presence of Jesus, my heart began to break for those lost souls. I could feel their regret, their horror, and their sorrow, and it was overwhelming. How many people like me had wasted their lives, ignored his call, and now found themselves standing at the gates of heaven, unable to enter? It was an agony that words couldn't capture, a pain that was deeper than anything I had ever experienced. The people who were being pulled away from the gates were not evil. They weren't monsters. They were just like me, people who had lived in ignorance or denial, people who had failed to see the truth until it was too late. I wanted to reach out to them, to somehow make it better, but I knew I couldn't. I couldn't undo their choices, just as I couldn't undo mine. Their fate, like mine, had been sealed by the choices they had made throughout their lives. But then, something in me shifted. Even amid this despair, even as I faced the harsh truth of my failure, I felt a glimmer of hope. A whisper, a realization that I still had a chance, that as long as I was still here, it was not too late for me to change. I had been given a second chance, and I knew I could not waste it. I looked at Jesus, my heart heavy with sorrow and remorse, and he met my gaze with a look of compassion and understanding. His eyes were full of sadness, yes, but also full of love, a love that was still available to me, even now. The gates of heaven were still there, glowing in the distance, and I knew that I could still walk through them, if only I turned to him, if only I truly embraced him with my heart. But that was the key. It wasn't enough to simply know of him. It wasn't enough to simply acknowledge him with words. I had to surrender everything to him. My pride, my fear, my doubts, everything I had been holding on to, had to be released, or I would never be able to enter. Jesus' voice broke through my thoughts once again, gentle yet firm. It is never too late, as long as you choose to walk with me. But you must give yourself fully to me, not just in words, but in your heart. I wanted to cry out, to beg for forgiveness, to ask for his mercy. But I knew that I had to do more than ask. I had to change. I had to live differently. I had to make him the center of my life, to live with purpose, and to show the world his love through my actions. Tears streamed down my face as I felt the weight of my failures, but also the weight of his love. A love that had never given up on me, a love that was still willing to accept me, even after everything I had done. The tears I shed were not just tears of regret, but tears of release. I felt like I was letting go of something dark, something heavy, that had been suffocating me for so long. Go, Jesus said, his voice now full of authority, but also filled with the warmth of compassion. It is time for you to make a choice. The gates are still open, but you must choose to enter. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. I looked at the gates one last time, seeing the people still standing outside, crying out for a chance, for mercy. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that this was it. The moment I had been given, the moment I could change everything. I knew that if I walked through those gates, I would be leaving behind everything that had held me back. Every excuse, every fear, every ounce of pride that had kept me from truly giving myself to Jesus. And so, I made my choice. I stepped forward, determined. The path before me was clear, but it was one I could only walk with him. And with each step, I knew I was shedding the past, leaving behind the darkness, and moving into the light of his love, into the peace that only he could offer. The angel's voice reverberated through the air, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundation of everything around me. It was a voice that commanded attention, that demanded respect, and yet it was filled with sorrow. The time is near, he repeated, and with those words, a wave of dread crashed over me, an overwhelming realization of the finality of what was being spoken. My mind raced. Judgment was coming. How many people had I known, how many had I seen, who were walking through life oblivious to the reality of what awaited them? How many people had I loved, who had brushed aside the call to truly know God, thinking there was always time, always room for one more chance? My thoughts flickered back to those faces at the gate, their cries, their pain, and I wondered how many of them had thought they had time too. How many had lived in the comfort of knowing the right words, but never the truth of what those words meant. The angel turned his gaze to the book of life, and I followed his line of sight. It glowed even brighter now, its pages turning like the wings of a great bird, each movement reflecting the passing of time, the moments slipping away. The blank spaces haunted me. Names that could have been. Names that should have been. But they were absent, lost in the vast emptiness of eternity. My heart twisted as I saw the names erased, their existence wiped away as if they had never been written there at all. These were the souls who had once walked the path of salvation but had turned away, each one a testament to the fragility of faith, to how easy it was to slip away from the truth when the world pulled at you from every side. I wanted to scream, to beg for those names to be written again, to somehow undo the damage that had been done. But the angel's presence, his solemn authority, silenced me. The truth was undeniable. There was no going back. The time had passed for those who had wandered too far. With trembling hands, I looked at Jesus again, hoping for some word of comfort, some sign that there was still a way to make things right. But his face was somber, his eyes filled with a sadness that I had never seen before. He did not speak, but in his silence I understood. The time for mercy was running out. The hour was drawing near. For many, The door to salvation would soon close, and they would never have the chance to enter. The angel's voice thundered once more, shaking me from my thoughts. The time is near. Judgment is coming. Many will be lost, and they will never know that they were lost until it is too late. I felt a coldness creep into my chest as the weight of his words pressed down on me. It was as if the air itself had become heavy, suffocating. I wanted to deny it, to argue, but the truth was clear. How many had been lost? How many more would be lost before it was over? I couldn't stop thinking about all the people I had known, all the faces that had crossed my path in my life. How many of them had never truly heard the call? How many of them were still wandering, unaware that their time was running out? The angel stepped closer, his eyes now focused on me. "You see this because you must understand," he said, his voice softer now, but still carrying the weight of eternal truth. "You must make your choice, and you must help others make theirs." I nodded, but I couldn't find my voice. How could I ever help anyone else when I had been so blind? How could I show them the way when I had only just begun to see it myself? The angel continued his words like a burning fire in my soul. "There is still time for those who are willing to listen, for those who are willing to choose. But for those who are indifferent, for those who continue to live as if this world is all that matters, the end will come swiftly. The gates will close, and they will find themselves outside, calling out to the one they ignored." Tears welled in my eyes as I felt the full weight of those words, of that terrible truth. The urgency of it all. I had lived my life as though time were endless, as though I had all the time in the world to make a decision, to choose. But now, standing in the presence of eternity, I realized how fragile that illusion was. "Go," the angel said, his voice now gentle but filled with a quiet authority. "Go and make your choice, before it is too late." I turned back to Jesus, my heart heavy with fear and sorrow. He met my gaze with a look of deep understanding, as if he had known all along what this moment would be like for me. He didn't need to say anything more. His presence, his love, and his invitation were all I needed. I knew what I had to do. As I took my first steps toward the gate, toward the light, I knew that it wasn't just for me. It was for everyone I could reach, everyone I could help see the truth before it was too late. I had to make my choice, and I had to help others make theirs. The memories of that vision lingered like an undeniable presence, refusing to let me forget. I couldn't escape the weight of it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the gate, the people, the book, and the angel. I could still feel the urgency, the overwhelming need to speak the truth, to warn those who were too blind to see. At night, when the quiet settled around me, I heard the angel's voice echo in my thoughts. "The time is near. Judgment is coming. Many will be lost." The words, once so distant, now felt like an imminent reality. They were no longer just an abstract warning. They were personal, affecting me in ways I couldn't explain. The truth of what I had witnessed, what I had been shown, burned inside me, and the fear of what might happen if I stayed silent became unbearable. The days passed, and life around me returned to its usual pace. But I couldn't go back to the way things were. My heart, my soul had been changed. How could I go about my daily life when I knew, deep down, how fleeting it all was? How could I pretend that everything was fine when the world was sinking into darkness? How could I let others go on with their lives, oblivious to what awaited them? I knew I had to speak. I had to share what I had seen, no matter how ridiculous it might sound to others, no matter how much they might dismiss it as a dream or a hallucination. But the fear gripped me. What if they didn't believe me? What if they laughed, ridiculed me, or worse, ignored the warning altogether? But then I remembered what Jesus had said. As long as there is life, there is hope. The urgency of his words spurred me forward. I had to give people a chance to hear the truth, to open their eyes before it was too late. One night, I sat with my family, feeling the weight of the silence in the room. They were happy to have me back, relieved that I was alive after what seemed like a close call, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. I was still here, but part of me had already been somewhere else. I needed to talk, but the words felt heavy on my tongue. How could I explain something so profound, so life-altering? Finally, I broke the silence. "I need to tell you something," I said, my voice shaking. They looked at me, their expressions soft and concerned, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. Would they understand? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. What I saw, what I experienced when I was gone, I started, unsure of how to continue but knowing that I had to. It wasn't just a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. I saw things I can't explain. But I know they were real. The truth that I saw, the urgency of it, it's real. There's a reason we have to live differently. We can't keep pretending like everything is fine. Time is running out. They stared at me in stunned silence. No one spoke for a long time. My heart hammered in my chest as I waited for their response. Finally, my mother reached out, her hand trembling as she took mine. I know you're scared, she said softly. But you don't have to carry this burden alone. Whatever happened, whatever you saw, we'll face it together. Her words brought a small measure of comfort, but the weight of the message I had to share still lingered. I couldn't just walk away from this, not after everything I had seen. I had to tell others, to share the truth, even if they didn't understand, even if they didn't believe. Days turned into weeks, and I started to find the courage to speak to others. I talked to close friends, and people I trusted, hoping that maybe they would understand. But the fear remained. What if they thought I was crazy? What if they turned away, dismissing everything I had experienced as a figment of my imagination? And yet, each time I shared my story, I felt a small shift. Maybe it was the way people listened or the way their eyes softened when they realized I wasn't asking for sympathy, but for them to understand the gravity of what I had seen. There were no guarantees, no promises that anyone would listen, but the words had to be spoken. I kept hearing the angel's voice in my mind, urging me forward. There is still time for those who are willing to listen. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I had to do whatever I could to make sure that no one around me would have to face that moment of realization too late. The world may have been too busy, too distracted, to notice the truth, but I couldn't be one of them anymore. I couldn't go back to the way things were. I had to speak, no matter the cost. The time was near, and the warning had to be given. The spiritual attacks were relentless. Every time I spoke out, every time I shared what I had seen, it felt like I was stirring up a storm that didn't just affect me but seemed to strike at everything around me. The darkness I had once seen seemed to be drawn to me now, as if it could sense the truth I was trying to carry. The whispers that used to come in the night were no longer just vague murmurs. They were sharp, clear voices that tried to make me question myself, my mission, and my purpose. Sometimes, I could almost hear them as if they were right beside me, their words filled with malice and doubt. At night, the shadows would creep into my room. I would feel them at the edge of my bed, watching me with unseen eyes, waiting for me to let my guard down. The temperature in the room would drop, and the air would feel thick as if the very atmosphere was trying to suffocate me. My body would go rigid with fear. The sleep paralysis would hit hard and fast, and I would feel like I was trapped in a world where I couldn't move, couldn't scream. But even in those moments, something inside me knew I had the power to break free. I would whisper the name of Jesus, the name that had protected me before, and immediately, the presence would disappear. It was like a shield, an invisible force that pushed away the darkness. The fear, though, didn't go away entirely. It stayed, lurking in the back of my mind, reminding me that I was walking a path few had dared to walk. There were moments when I doubted myself, when the weight of it all became too heavy to bear. When I would share my story, some would listen with sympathy but not understanding. Some of my closest friends tried to comfort me, but I could see it in their eyes. Pity, confusion, disbelief. They didn't understand. How could they? The truth I had experienced was far too real, too powerful, for anyone who hadn't lived it to grasp. I would see them struggle to find the right words and the right response, and in those moments, I felt more alone than ever. But it wasn't just the people around me who struggled to understand. I, too, had moments when I questioned what I was doing. I would wake up from yet another nightmare, drenched in sweat, and wonder if I was losing my mind. Maybe it was just the trauma of nearly dying, I thought. Maybe it was a side effect of my brain trying to make sense of something it couldn't understand. But then, I would remember the faces I saw, those lost souls, the ones who thought they were saved but weren't, the ones who were pulled away from the gates of heaven at the last moment. I could still hear their cries and feel their desperation. How could I forget them? How could I stay silent when I knew there was a chance to warn others? The more I spoke, the more I began to see a shift. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. Some people began to listen. Some of them came to me in secret, not wanting others to know they were even considering what I had to say, but they wanted to know more. They wanted to understand what it meant to truly know God. They wanted to know what they could do to avoid the fate of those I had seen. One woman in particular stood out to me. She was a colleague, someone I had worked with for years but never really talked to on a personal level. She came to me one evening, looking around nervously before sitting down beside me. Her hands shook as she spoke, and I could tell that she had been wrestling with something for a long time. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling. "I've been living a good life, but I don't think I've ever really known God." She paused, looking down at her hands, and then looked up at me with a mix of fear and hope in her eyes. What should I do? I felt my heart swell with compassion. This was why I was doing this. This was the reason for the attacks, the ridicule, and the isolation. I was here to help her, to help anyone who was lost, anyone who was seeking the truth, even if they didn't know how to find it. I took a deep breath, offering her the most genuine smile I could muster. "It's never too late to start," I said, my voice steady but filled with conviction. "It's not about being perfect. It's about turning to God, asking for His forgiveness, and letting Him transform you. He's always waiting for you to come back to Him." I could see the relief flooding her face as she listened to my words, and at that moment, I knew that no matter how hard the journey was, it was worth it. She wasn't the only one. There were others. People who began to understand, who realized that their faith wasn't just a habit, a tradition, but something real, something that could change their lives. And for each of them, I knew that the spiritual battles I faced, the fear, the doubt, the isolation, it was all worth it. But the attacks didn't stop. If anything, they grew more intense. It felt like the darkness was trying everything it could to silence me. The nightmares became more vivid, more terrifying. There were nights when I woke up gasping for breath as if the very air had been stolen from my lungs. My heart would race, and I would feel a cold hand gripping my chest, trying to squeeze the life out of me. But every time I would call His name, and every time the darkness would recede, leaving me with a peace that only He could provide. I learned to rely on Him more than ever. I learned to pray in the quiet moments, amid the attacks, asking for His strength, His protection, and His guidance. And even in my weakest moments, I felt His presence, always there, always supporting me, always reminding me that I was not alone. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. But as I kept speaking out, I started to notice something else. It wasn't just the people who listened in secret anymore. Some of them began to speak out too. They began to share their own experiences and their struggles with faith, and they started to encourage others. It wasn't just my voice that was being heard anymore. It was the collective voice of those who had come to understand the truth, the voice of those who knew the urgency of the message. The attacks were still there, but so was the power of His name. And with each new person who turned toward God, each new soul who took a step toward salvation, the darkness seemed to lose its grip just a little bit more. One day, after another round of spiritual warfare, I sat quietly in my room, looking out the window as the sun began to set. I thought about how far I had come, how much I had learned, and how much had changed. The fear was still there sometimes, but it no longer controlled me. The attacks were still relentless, but they no longer shook me. I understood now that the path I was walking wasn't just about me. It was about everyone I could help, everyone I could reach. Every time someone asked for help, every time someone turned their life around, it was worth it. Every time the darkness tried to pull me back, every time it tried to silence me, I would push forward. Because I knew that the truth, His truth, was worth every battle. And so, I kept going. I kept speaking out, sharing the warning I had been given, telling people about the urgency of the time we were living in. The darkness may have been powerful, but I knew that the light was stronger, and as long as I held onto that light, nothing could stop me. The realization hit me like a thunderclap. The name of Jesus wasn't just a word. It was a weapon, a shield, a divine force that could push back the darkness. And in those moments when I felt threatened, when the enemy tried to silence me, it wasn't just an attack on me, it was an attack on the truth. That meant my mission was more critical than I had ever imagined. If the forces of darkness were working so hard to stop me, it could only mean that what I was doing mattered, that I was on the right path, even if it was the most difficult one. I couldn't stop. The more the attacks came, the more determined I became. I could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on me, but it wasn't a burden I resented. It was a calling, and I knew I had been chosen for it. I couldn't stop now, not when I knew how much was at stake. The urgency I felt in my soul was undeniable, like a fire that had been ignited deep within me. Time was running out for so many, and I couldn't ignore that truth. The world began to look different after that. It was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes. Before, I had been like everyone else, caught up in the routine of life, consumed with the small things that seemed so important at the time. The latest news, the endless distractions, the things that seemed to matter, but in the grand scheme of things, were just fleeting moments in the grand story of eternity. But now, I saw through it all. The world around me, once so familiar, now seemed foreign. Everywhere I looked, I saw people walking in blindness. They went about their days as if tomorrow were guaranteed, as if their lives were their own to control. They clung to their comfort, their possessions, their achievements, but none of it mattered. None of it would last. And most tragically, they didn't even see it. I watched people, friends, family, strangers, and I saw how many of them were living like they had forever to make things right. How many times had I seen someone claim to believe in God, but their actions didn't reflect it? How many times had I heard someone talk about their faith, but it was clear that it was just a shallow connection? It was like God was an accessory to their lives, someone to turn to in times of trouble or when they needed something, but not someone they truly sought to follow, not someone who shaped their daily choices. The blindness was everywhere. It was in the way people ignored the suffering around them, the way they lived like eternity was some distant idea, not a reality that was coming for all of us. It was in the way they let fear, pride, and complacency guide their lives, leading them away from the truth without even realizing it. And that's when I saw it. The invisible battle that had been raging all around me, all around everyone. It wasn't just about the big moments, the wars, the disasters, the headlines. No, the real battle was happening in the everyday. The choices we made without thinking, the moments when we let our guards down, when we let the world influence us more than we realized. The subtle ways in which evil infiltrates our thoughts, our desires, and even our hearts without us ever noticing it. I could see it now. It wasn't some grand, dramatic evil with horns and fire. It was subtle, insidious, creeping into the corners of our minds and lives. It was in the whispers that told us we didn't need God, that we could do it all on our own, that we had more time than we realized. And those whispers weren't from our minds. They were from the enemy, trying to keep us from seeing the truth, from waking up before it was too late. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't close my eyes to it. I had seen the reality, and now I had to speak the truth, no matter the cost. The more I spoke, the more I saw the resistance, and the more I felt the pressure. But I also saw the flickers of light, the people who began to see too, who started waking up to the truth that had been hidden for so long. It wasn't easy for them, just as it wasn't easy for me. But they were starting to understand. And that was all I needed. The more I shared, the more I realized that there was a purpose in all of this, a divine purpose that transcended the attacks and the doubts. This wasn't just about me, it was about waking others up, about sharing the truth before it was too late. I was called to be a light in the darkness, and as hard as it was, I would keep walking that path. Because if there was one person, just one person, who could see and understand, then it would all be worth it. The name of Jesus had power, and it was my strength. The battle was real, but I knew that with him, I could keep going. I couldn't stop now, not when the stakes were so high. I was part of something bigger than myself, something that would last long after I was gone. And in that truth, I found my strength to continue, to speak out, to share the warning, and to fight for the souls who still had time to turn toward the light. As we wrap up this powerful journey, I want you to take a moment and reflect on what you've learned so far. The truth, the battles we face, and the urgency of living with purpose. What resonates with you the most? I'd love to hear from you. What is one thing you've learned today that you're determined to bring into practice in your life moving forward? Leave your thoughts and insights in the comments below. I'm eager to see how this message impacts you and how you plan to apply it in your journey. If you like this video, please leave a comment, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Your support means everything. Thank you for watching, and remember, time is precious. Let's make the most of it.